It was around 4 a.m. on a Saturday, and the interstate was eerily quiet, save for the rhythmic hum of my car engine. I was driving to work, a job that had me on the road at ungodly hours. The sky was still dark, the stars barely visible through the faint haze of light pollution from the distant city. I was in the middle lane, speeding at around 75 to 80 miles per hour. I had already left my house later than I'd planned, and I was now racing against time to avoid being late. As I drove, I noticed a flicker of movement in my left mirror. A car was approaching at an alarming rate. My initial reaction was one of irritation. Why was this car speeding so aggressively? But as it drew closer, my irritation turned to concern. This car wasn't just speeding. It was barreling down the highway with an intensity that seemed dangerous. I could see the car's make and model. It was a grey Honda Accord coupe. I glanced back at the car and noticed it was gaining on me rapidly. I was already traveling at a considerable speed, so the fact that this vehicle was overtaking me so quickly suggested it was going well over 90 miles per hour, perhaps even closer to 100 miles per hour. My pulse quickened as the car zoomed past me. I could see the driver's face, briefly illuminated by the dim light of the highway. He glanced back at me, but I didn't have time to make out any details beyond the fact that he looked unusually focused. Then, my heart skipped a beat. As the car passed, I caught sight of someone in the back seat, an anxious, young woman who was banging on the window with desperation. It was still dark, and the visibility was poor, but the fear on her face was unmistakable. She seemed to be pleading for help, her hands flailing as she tried to get attention. At first, I thought it might be some sort of prank or a game between friends, but as the car continued to speed away, I noticed something even more alarming. The driver of the Honda suddenly swerved. My anxiety spiked as I saw him push the woman down, her body disappearing from view. It was clear now that something sinister was happening. The swerve seemed deliberate, a maneuver to hide her from view and perhaps even to intimidate me. This was no ordinary road rage or argument. This was a possible kidnapping unfolding right before my eyes. Panic surged through me, but I knew I had to stay calm and act quickly. I accelerated, trying to keep the car in sight. My mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. I stayed close behind them, trying to observe their movements while keeping a safe distance. The driver was reaching back into the car with a swinging motion. It was clear now, he was hitting her. Her arms flailed helplessly as she tried to defend herself. The scene was horrific, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered quickly, and I relayed the situation with as much detail as I could. I described the car, its speed, and our location. As I spoke, the car in front of me began to slow down. The driver was clearly aware that I was following him and seemed to be planning to confront me or escape. My heart raced as I realized the danger of the situation. I didn't know if the driver was armed, and I was terrified of what could happen next. In a desperate move, I swerved around the Honda and floored it. My priority was to get away from the driver, but I also needed to stay close enough to keep track of where they were going. I took the next exit but didn't go all the way up the ramp. Instead, I waited for the Honda to pass and then re-entered the highway, continuing to follow them at high speed. I was now going 90 miles per hour again, trying to catch up with the car. The driver noticed me once more and began to brake aggressively, trying to force me to slow down. I tried to maneuver around him, but he cut me off, blocking my path. The situation was escalating rapidly. I had no choice but to stop and assess my options. The driver of the Honda got out of his car and started running toward mine with something in his hand. Panic set in as I realized he might be armed. I quickly threw my car in reverse, trying to distance myself from the threat. The driver stopped chasing me, and I shifted back into drive before he could get back to his car. I sped away, hoping to create enough distance between us. The 911 operator informed me that a state trooper was not far from our location and advised me to keep driving until I passed him. The fear and adrenaline were overwhelming, but I focused on the road ahead. The driver of the Honda continued to follow me, both of us traveling at speeds exceeding 90 miles per hour. The tension was palpable. Then, a wave of relief washed over me as I saw flashing blue and red lights in my rearview mirror. The state trooper had arrived, and he pulled over the Honda. I watched from a safe distance as the trooper approached the vehicle with his gun drawn. The driver was ordered out of the car and onto the ground, where he was handcuffed and taken into custody. The woman in the back seat was finally freed, though she was visibly shaken and badly beaten. As the situation was brought under control, I approached the scene and learned more about what had happened. The woman was incredibly grateful and kept thanking me for my intervention. It turned out that the driver was her ex-boyfriend. He had shown up at her house, and when she refused to speak with him, he violently attacked her, forcing her into the car. The child locks were engaged, making it impossible for her to escape on her own. It was terrifying to think of what might have happened if I hadn't witnessed her plea for help. Several months later, I found myself embarking on a long drive from Chicago to Massachusetts. I was traveling to support a family member running in the Boston Marathon. The drive was daunting, as Route 20 is one of the longest highways in the US. I left around 3 p.m., with the GPS estimating a 15-hour journey. Given my tendency to drive fast, I hoped to complete the trip in around 14 hours, arriving by 5 a.m. if all went well. Most of Route 20 is open land, and traffic was sparse. Around 1 a.m., I was nearly alone on the highway. To stay alert, I cranked up the music and tried to focus on the road. Despite my exhaustion, I was optimistic about making good time. Suddenly, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. A pickup truck was tailgating me aggressively. I switched to the right lane to let him pass, but he sped up and matched my speed, remaining dangerously close. As soon as I accelerated to overtake him, he followed, staying in my blind spot. I realized something was off. This wasn't just a case of road rage. The truck was deliberately trying to intimidate me. I switched lanes, and the truck did the same, continuing to follow me closely. The truck's driver began flashing his lights behind me. I was scared and confused, unsure of what to do. There were no other cars around, and the highway was deserted. I accelerated, hoping to put more distance between us. The truck responded by speeding up as well. My anxiety mounted as I tried to maneuver away, but the truck kept blocking my attempts. At one point, the truck cut in front of me and started braking aggressively. I tried to swerve around him, but he blocked me at every turn. I honked my horn frantically, hoping someone would notice. The truck's driver turned on his hazards and began waving his arm out the window, signaling for me to pull over. The situation was escalating quickly. I decided to take a risk and pulled around him as he began to pull onto the grass. I floored it, reaching speeds of 100 miles per hour to escape. The truck stayed on my tail, but I managed to exit the highway and get off at the first available exit. At the red light at the end of the ramp, I stopped, expecting the truck to have finally given up. Instead, the truck's headlights pulled up next to me. I looked over and saw 3 men in the truck, all wearing vendetta masks. They stared at me, trying to intimidate me. Terrified, I blew through the red light and drove onto a main road where there were finally other cars. The pickup truck stopped following me, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I later realized that what I had experienced was more than just road rage. The pickup truck had clearly been involved in a more sinister plot. I didn't get the truck's license plate, and I could barely remember its make, just that it was an old, black pickup truck from the 90s. I parked at a Walmart and fell into an exhausted sleep. The next morning, I finished my drive to Massachusetts and recounted the harrowing experience to my family, cautioning them about the dangers of late-night driving. A few months later, I had another frightening encounter. It was a Tuesday night in March, and I was driving home from a friend's house. The weather was foggy, making the highway appear like a scene from a horror movie. The fog was dense, and the highway was mostly deserted, save for the occasional semi-truck. As I navigated the foggy stretch of road, I saw a car parked on the side with its hazard lights blinking. It was an old, beat-up sedan with a man standing beside it. He appeared to be in his late 20s or early 30s, dressed in a tattered jacket. I hesitated but decided to stop and offer assistance, thinking he might need help with his car or be in an emergency situation. The man approached my car and asked if I could wait with him or give him a ride. He seemed agitated, and his insistence made me uneasy. He was unusually persistent, and I could see a glint of something metallic in his hand. My gut told me something was wrong, so I decided to leave. I started my car and began to back away slowly, trying not to provoke him. Just as I was about to drive off, the man reached for my car door handle, trying to open it. Panic surged through me. I quickly put my car in drive and sped away. As I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw another man running towards me with a baseball bat. My heart raced as I floored it, narrowly escaping the dangerous situation. I drove straight home, feeling a mixture of relief and terror. Later, I discovered that the men had been targeting drivers who stopped to help. They were using the pretense of a broken-down car to lure victims and rob them. The thought of what might have happened if I had stayed or rolled down my window sent shivers down my spine. I learned that similar incidents had been reported in the area, and I was fortunate to have escaped unscathed. The most disturbing incident happened in 2020, when I was working overnight shifts at a local hospital. My routine involved driving home through a secluded parkway, a stretch of road surrounded by dense woods. One night, I stopped to help a man whose car battery had died. He was grateful and asked to use my phone, which I hesitantly allowed him to borrow. While he was on the phone, I noticed the car keys were still in the ignition. Seizing the opportunity, I started the car and prepared to leave. But just as I was about to drive away, someone grabbed me from the back seat. I was choked and struggled to free myself. My heart pounded as I fought to break free, managing to turn and push the attacker away. In the chaos, I managed to escape and drove home, shaking and traumatized. The next day, I discovered that the man who borrowed my phone had used it to steal thousands of dollars worth of Bitcoin from my account. The thieves had managed to get my personal information, and I realized they could have tracked my address or caused even more damage. The experience left me feeling vulnerable and cautious. I reported the theft to the authorities, but the phone and the stolen funds were never recovered. The fear from that night lingered, and I became increasingly wary of stopping to help anyone on the highway, especially at night. As I look back on these experiences, I'm struck by how quickly a seemingly routine situation can escalate into a life-threatening crisis. The incidents serve as a stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk on the road, even in the most ordinary of circumstances. Each encounter has taught me valuable lessons about personal safety and the importance of trusting my instincts. Though the fear never fully fades, I've learned to approach such situations with caution and awareness, hoping to avoid putting myself in harm's way, while still offering help when it's safe to do so.